I never thought betrayal would come wearing the face of the two people I trusted most. One was my best friend since childhood, the other was the person I once thought I'd spend forever with. When I found out they had joined forces, not for love, not for happiness, but for money, I realized too late that my inheritance had been their target all along. Before I tell you how deep this betrayal went, I want to give a quick shout out to everyone who's been supporting these stories. If you love shocking family betrayals and cold revenge tales, don't forget to subscribe, drop a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. I promise, you don't want to miss the final twist in this one. Now, let me take you back to where it all began, long before I knew what kind of knives they were sharpening behind my back. I grew up with Hannah. She wasn't just my best friend, she was practically a sister. Our families lived just 3 houses apart in a quiet neighborhood, where everyone knew each other's names. We went to the same schools, wore matching Halloween costumes, and even called each other twin flames in middle school. That's how close we were. If I had secrets, she was the vault I placed them in. When my parents were too busy with work, Hannah was the one who kept me company, who sat with me on long afternoons when loneliness crept in. I never questioned her loyalty. Not once. By the time we hit college, Hannah and I were inseparable. People often joked we'd probably live next door to each other when we got married, raising our kids like siblings. I believed it. We'd talk about weddings, dream jobs, vacations, and how nothing could ever break our bond. And then came Ethan. I met him at a campus event, tall, charming, the kind of smile that made you feel seen. He wasn't flashy, but there was something steady about him, something grounding. I was drawn in almost instantly. Hannah was right there when we first started talking, and later that night, she teased me mercilessly about how obvious it was that I liked him. When Ethan and I officially became a couple, Hannah was my biggest cheerleader. She helped me pick out outfits for dates, stayed up late with me analyzing every word he texted, and even coached me through our first fight. She acted like she was rooting for us, like she was genuinely happy for me. And I believed her. Why wouldn't I? Those early years with Ethan felt golden. We weren't perfect, but I thought we were building something real. My parents adored him. They'd invite him to family dinners, and my mom once whispered to me, "I can really see you two building a life together." Hearing that only deepened my feelings for him. And Hannah? She was always there. Sometimes too much, if I'm honest. But I brushed it off. If Ethan and I were going somewhere, she'd somehow find a way to tag along. If we were having a quiet night in, she'd show up at my door with snacks and wine. At first, I thought it was just her being her, clingy, maybe, but harmless. Looking back now, I realize that's where the cracks started forming. There were little moments I ignored. Like the time Ethan made a joke at dinner, and I noticed Hannah's laugh lingered just a little too long. Or the time I caught her staring at him across the room when she thought no one was looking. But I trusted her. I trusted both of them. The idea that either of them could cross a line? Impossible. Still, the universe has a way of planting seeds of truth long before you're ready to see them. I remember one particular night. It must have been 2 years into my relationship with Ethan. The 3 of us were sitting on the couch watching a movie. I got up to grab some water, and when I came back, I saw Hannah leaning in a little too close to him. Nothing explicit, but enough to make my stomach twist. She straightened up quickly when she noticed me. "Everything okay?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "Of course," she said with that familiar grin. "Just asking Ethan about his classes." And I let it go. Because why wouldn't I? That was the kind of blind faith I had in both of them. Faith that would later cost me more than I ever imagined. For now, though, my world still looked whole. I was in love, my best friend was by my side, and the future seemed like a straight road leading somewhere bright. But life has a cruel sense of humor. What I didn't know then was that Hannah and Ethan had already started weaving threads of betrayal behind my back. I wouldn't see the full picture until much later, when it was far too late to stop it. All I knew in those early days was that I had the 2 people I trusted most in my corner. And that trust was about to be weaponized against me in ways I never could have predicted. That was just the beginning. What came next wasn't just heartbreak, it was the kind of betrayal that claws into your bones. But before we get there, you need to understand how perfectly they played their parts and how deeply I let them in. Because when everything finally unraveled, I realized I hadn't just lost a boyfriend. I hadn't just lost a friend. I had lost the illusion that loyalty meant anything at all. And the inheritance they were after? That part of the story is still to come. They say love makes you blind, but in my case, it made me willingly ignore all the warning signs. Ethan wasn't perfect, but I was convinced he was the one. Every little thing about him, from the way he tucked his hair back when he was thinking to the way he always insisted on walking me home, felt like proof that he truly cared for me. And Hannah? She made sure to reinforce that belief. In those early years, Hannah positioned herself as the biggest supporter of my relationship. She'd listen to me gush about Ethan for hours, sit through endless retellings of our dates, and even joke about how she'd be my maid of honor someday. "You better not pick anyone else," she'd laugh, tossing a pillow at me during one of our sleepovers. "If I'm not standing next to you when you say I do, then we're not really best friends." At the time, I thought it was sweet. Proof of her loyalty. I never considered that maybe, just maybe, she was planting herself into my love story for reasons I couldn't see. Ethan and I grew closer over time. We studied together, traveled together, and even spent holidays with each other's families. He had this way of making me feel like I was the only person in the room, even when we were surrounded by people. That kind of attention is intoxicating. It wraps around you, makes you feel secure, even when the foundation is already cracking. One summer, Ethan took me on a road trip. Just the two of us, driving with the windows down, singing along to songs at the top of our lungs. We camped under the stars, ate cheap diner food, and talked about our dreams. That was the first time he told me he could see a future with me. "I don't know what it looks like yet," he said, his arm wrapped around me as we lay on a blanket under the night sky. "But I know I want you in it." I remember my heart swelling with so much joy it almost hurt. I couldn't wait to tell Hannah. When I did, she smiled. But there was something in her eyes, a flicker I couldn't name at the time. Jealousy? Resentment? Whatever it was, it vanished quickly, replaced by her usual supportive grin. "That's amazing," she said, pulling me into a hug. "You two are perfect together." And I believed her. The thing about trust is, once it's given freely, it makes you overlook the strangest things. Like the way Hannah always seemed to know Ethan's schedule better than I did. Or how Ethan would sometimes laugh at her jokes in a way he didn't with anyone else. There was one afternoon that stands out even now. Ethan and I had planned a date, just a simple picnic at the park. I showed up, blanket in hand, only to find Hannah already there, sitting on the grass with him. "Oh hey," she said cheerfully, waving me over like she hadn't just crashed my date. "Ethan mentioned you were coming, so I thought I'd join. I brought snacks." I laughed it off at the time, telling myself it was just Hannah being Hannah. She was my best friend. If she wanted to be around us, why not? Still, a small part of me felt uneasy. But I buried it, because what kind of person doubts their best friend? Hannah had this way of inserting herself into every corner of my life with Ethan. When we argued, she'd always take my side, at least to my face. She'd say things like, "He's lucky to have you," or "Don't let him walk over you." But there were other times when her words carried a different tone. Once, after Ethan and I had a particularly bad fight about his late nights at work, Hannah sat me down. "You deserve someone who prioritizes you," she said softly. "I mean, I know Ethan loves you, but sometimes. I don't know. Maybe he doesn't show it enough." At the time, I thought she was just being protective. Now I wonder if she was planting seeds, making me question him while simultaneously positioning herself as the one who truly understood me. Despite the occasional unease, my relationship with Ethan grew more serious. We talked about moving in together after graduation, maybe even buying a house. My parents loved the idea. They adored Ethan and constantly hinted at marriage. Hannah was always there for those conversations too. Sometimes she'd join in, talking about how our kids would grow up together, how she'd be the fun auntie. She made herself a fixture in the future Ethan and I were building. And I didn't see the danger in that. Not yet. The truth is, I was too blinded by love. I wanted so badly to believe that I had it all, an amazing boyfriend and a best friend who supported us. It never crossed my mind that the two of them might want something else entirely. Looking back now, the warning signs were glaring. But at the time, I brushed them aside. Because when you're happy, or at least think you are, you don't want to question it. You don't want to dig deeper into the little moments that don't add up. But reality has a way of forcing itself on you, whether you're ready for it or not. And the first crack in my perfect little world was about to split wide open. It started with Ethan pulling away. At first, it was subtle. He canceled a date here, forgot to text back there. When I asked if something was wrong, he said he was just busy. And I believed him, because I always believed him. But then, Hannah started acting differently too. She was still around, still supportive, but sometimes she'd go quiet when Ethan's name came up, like she was hiding something. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was overthinking. But the truth? The two people I trusted most were already slipping away from me, slipping toward each other. And I was too blind to see it. The first time Ethan canceled on me, I didn't think much of it. He said he had to stay late at work, and I told him not to worry about it. We'd see each other soon. But then it happened again. And again. Dates postponed, calls unanswered, messages left on read for hours. At first, I chalked it up to stress. He was ambitious, after all. He wanted to prove himself in his career. But the distance between us kept stretching, and no matter how much I tried to ignore it, I could feel something was slipping away. I just didn't know what or who was pulling him. One Friday night, I decided to surprise him. I drove to his apartment with takeout and a bottle of wine, thinking maybe all we needed was some time together. When I knocked, he opened the door looking startled. "Oh," he said, almost like he hadn't expected me. That stung. "Surprise," I said with a smile that felt forced. "I thought we could have dinner." He hesitated, then stepped aside to let me in. But the whole evening, he was distant. His eyes flicked to his phone too often, his laughter didn't sound real, and when I tried to kiss him, he pulled back slightly. Something inside me sank. "Ethan, what's going on?" I finally asked, my voice trembling more than I wanted it to. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. I don't know if this is working anymore." The words hit like a punch to the chest. "What do you mean? We've been together for years." "I know," he said, his eyes avoiding mine. "But people change. I've changed. And I don't think I can give you what you need anymore." It felt like the floor dropped out from under me. My throat tightened and my vision blurred with tears. I wanted to scream, to beg, to demand an explanation, but all I could manage was a whisper. "Is there someone else?" His silence was louder than any answer. I left that night with my chest hollow and my hands shaking, clutching the bottle of wine I'd brought as if it could somehow hold me together. The next morning, Hannah showed up at my door. She didn't even wait for me to invite her in. She just wrapped me in a hug the second I opened it. "He's an idiot," she said fiercely. "You're worth 1,000 of him." I broke down right there in her arms. For hours, I poured out my pain, my confusion, my disbelief. Hannah listened, nodding, handing me tissues, and telling me over and over again that I deserved better. "You'll see," she whispered. "One day, you'll look back and thank him for letting you go." At the time, I thought she was just being the best friend I needed. I clung to her words, letting them soothe me. I had no idea she was already playing both sides, already tightening the threads of a betrayal I wouldn't uncover until it was too late. Weeks passed. Ethan and I were over, but the wound was raw. I couldn't escape him completely. We had mutual friends, overlapping routines, too many memories woven into my life. Every time I saw him, my heart twisted. And Hannah was always there. Always ready to distract me, to pull me into girls' nights, to remind me that I was loved. But sometimes her words slipped. Once, while we were watching a movie, she sighed and said, "Ethan is attractive. Anyone can see that. It's just such a waste that he didn't appreciate what he had." It was a strange thing to hear from my best friend, but I brushed it off. I told myself she was just trying to make me feel better, to point out that I wasn't crazy for having loved him. But deep down, something about it gnawed at me. As months went by, I tried to move on. I threw myself into work, into hobbies, into anything that kept me from drowning in the loneliness Ethan left behind. Hannah stayed glued to my side, always texting, always showing up. But then I started noticing little things. She'd disappear for hours without telling me where she was. She'd change the subject whenever Ethan's name came up, sometimes a little too quickly. And once, when I asked if she'd spoken to him recently, she hesitated before saying no. Her eyes told me otherwise. I wanted to confront her. I wanted to ask outright if she was hiding something. But the idea of accusing my best friend felt unthinkable. After all, hadn't she been there for me when I was at my lowest? Hadn't she held me together when I was falling apart? So I swallowed my doubts. Again. Then came the night everything shifted. I was scrolling through social media when I saw a photo. It was blurry, taken at a bar by someone in the background. But the faces were clear enough. Ethan, Hannah, sitting together, leaning close, laughing in a way that looked too familiar. My heart pounded as I stared at the image. My brain scrambled for explanations. Maybe they just ran into each other. Maybe it was nothing. But in my gut, I knew. I confronted Hannah the next day, holding my phone up with the photo. "What is this?" I demanded. She glanced at it, then back at me, her expression carefully neutral. "Oh, that? It's nothing. I ran into him, that's all." "Ran into him? At a bar? Alone?" My voice cracked, fury and fear mixing in my chest. "Yes," she said firmly. "I know how it looks, but I promise, it's not what you think." And like a fool, I believed her. Or maybe I wanted to believe her. Because admitting otherwise meant facing a truth I wasn't ready for. So I tucked the photo away, buried my suspicions, and clung to the version of reality where my best friend wasn't capable of betrayal. But betrayal doesn't stay buried forever. And soon enough, the lies they'd woven would unravel in a way that left me gasping for air. For now, I tried to heal. I tried to tell myself Ethan was the past and Hannah was still my anchor. But in reality, the storm was already gathering. And when it broke, it would take everything I thought I knew about love, friendship, and family and tear it to pieces. After the breakup with Ethan, I tried to stitch my life back together piece by piece. Work kept me occupied, Hannah kept me distracted, and I kept telling myself I was moving on. But there was still a hollow ache in my chest whenever I thought about him. And no matter how much Hannah tried to fill the silence with laughter and plans, the emptiness lingered. I didn't know it then, but while I was struggling to heal, another storm was forming. One that had less to do with heartbreak and more to do with something far bigger, my family's inheritance. It started with a dinner at my parents' house. I remember the smell of roasted chicken filling the kitchen, the clinking of glasses, and my father clearing his throat in that way he always did before he said something serious. "Your mother and I have been updating the will," he announced, glancing between me and my siblings. "We wanted you all to know where things stand." My heart skipped. We weren't a wealthy family, but we weren't struggling either. My father had worked his whole life to build a small business, and my mother had inherited property from her side. Together, they'd built something meaningful, something they wanted to pass on. I listened as they explained the details, the house, the business, the investments. And then came the condition that made my stomach tighten. "For you," my father said, looking directly at me, "the inheritance will only be released upon marriage. It's a tradition on your mother's side. We want to know that whoever you build your life with will share in the family legacy." I blinked. "Wait, you mean I can't access it unless I'm married?" "That's right," my mother said gently. "We want to make sure you're settled before taking on that responsibility. It's not meant to pressure you, it's just how it's been done for generations." I forced a smile, but inside, I felt conflicted. Marriage had always been on the horizon with Ethan at least, until he left. Now the idea felt impossible, almost cruel. "Don't worry," my father added, misinterpreting my silence. "There's no rush. When the time is right, it will be yours. I nodded, trying to push down the unease. At that moment, I didn't know how dangerous that condition would become, or how quickly it would be twisted against me. Of course, I told Hannah. She was the only person I shared everything with, the only one I trusted with secrets that weighed heavy on my chest. We were sitting on her couch, a half-empty bag of chips between us, when I spilled it all. They tied my inheritance to marriage, I said with a half-laugh that didn't feel genuine. Can you believe that? I'm basically locked out of it unless I find someone to marry. Hannah's eyes widened, then softened. Wow, that's a lot of pressure. Tell me about it. I sighed. I mean, it's not like I'm anywhere near that now. After Ethan, my voice trailed off, the wound still raw. Hannah reached over, squeezing my hand. You'll find someone, she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. And when you do, it'll all fall into place. I thought she was being supportive. But looking back now, I realized something shifted in her gaze that night. Like she'd just been handed a key she didn't even know she needed. Weeks passed, and I tried to bury the inheritance talk in the back of my mind. It wasn't something I could control, so why obsess over it? But Hannah never seemed to forget. She'd bring it up casually, almost innocently. So, do you think your parents would ever change the condition? Have they ever done this with anyone else in the family? What if you never get married? What happens then? At the time, I answered her questions without suspicion. She was curious, I told myself. She wanted to understand my life, my struggles. But the truth? She was studying it, memorizing it, figuring out exactly where the cracks were in my family's foundation. Meanwhile, Ethan wasn't gone, not really. He hovered in the periphery of my life, a ghost that wouldn't disappear. I'd see him at mutual friends' gatherings, hear his name in conversations, and sometimes, late at night, I'd still find myself scrolling through old photos like I could bring back what we'd lost. And Hannah? She never failed to be there in those moments of weakness. Always the shoulder, always the voice reminding me I deserved better. But there were times her comfort felt different. Once, after I cried about Ethan for the 100th time, she brushed a strand of hair from my face and said softly, "You don't need him. You don't need anyone." Her words lingered in my head long after she said them. Not because of what she said, but how she said it, like she was convincing herself as much as me. Then came the night I overheard something I wasn't supposed to. I had gone to Hannah's place unannounced, holding a tub of ice cream and hoping for a distraction from my swirling thoughts. As I walked up the stairs to her apartment, I heard her voice through the slightly open window. "Yes, I know about the condition," she was saying, her tone sharp, urgent. She told me everything. "Don't worry, I have a plan." I froze. My heart raced as I strained to hear more, but her voice dropped lower. I couldn't make out the rest. When she finally opened the door minutes later, her face was the perfect mask of surprise and warmth. "Hey, ice cream? You're the best." I wanted to ask who she'd been talking to. I wanted to push. But fear of losing her, of facing the truth, kept me silent. So I laughed, handed her the ice cream, and pretended I hadn't heard a thing. That night, lying in bed, my mind spun. Who had she been talking to? Why did it sound like she was discussing my inheritance? But I convinced myself I was being paranoid. She was my best friend. She would never do anything to hurt me. At least, that's what I told myself. The reality was, Hannah was already deep in a plan I couldn't even begin to imagine. And the person she was planning it with? I'd soon find out it was the last person I ever expected. I should have trusted my gut the night I overheard Hannah on the phone. That sick feeling in my stomach wasn't paranoia, it was my body trying to warn me. But I pushed it away, desperate to hold on to the illusion that my best friend was still my anchor. For a while, everything seemed normal enough. Hannah still showed up with wine and snacks, still cheered me on at work events, still claimed she was too busy for dating. And I believed her because I wanted to. But the cracks couldn't stay hidden forever. The first real fracture came at a birthday dinner for one of our mutual friends. I walked into the restaurant, smiling, ready for a night of distraction. But my smile faltered the second I saw them. Ethan, Hannah, sitting side by side, laughing like they shared some private joke. My breath caught, but I forced myself to play it cool. I slid into a seat across from them, my heart pounding so hard I could barely hear the chatter around me. Halfway through the meal, someone made a teasing comment. "You two look cozy," they said with a grin. The table erupted in laughter, but my world tilted. Ethan chuckled awkwardly. Hannah just smirked. "It's not like that," she said quickly, but her hand brushed against his under the table. I saw it, and it burned. After dinner, I cornered Hannah outside. The night air was cool, but I was sweating. "Are you seeing him?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. Her eyes widened, then softened into a practiced look of concern. "No, of course not. We're just friends. You know that." "Do I?" I snapped. "Because it doesn't feel that way." She reached for my hand. "I would never do that to you. You're my best friend. Please don't let anyone plant doubts in your head." Her words were honey, sweet, and convincing. And for the 100th time, I swallowed the truth I didn't want to face. But deep down, a seed of suspicion had taken root. Weeks later, the truth came crashing down in a way I'll never forget. I was at work when my phone buzzed with a message from a mutual acquaintance. "Have you seen this?" Attached was a photo of Hannah and Ethan, standing in front of a glittering backdrop, her hand proudly extended to show off a diamond ring. The caption read, "She said yes." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. My stomach dropped, my throat closed, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. My best friend .myx engaged. And the worst part? I hadn't heard it from her. She hadn't even given me the courtesy of telling me first. I left work early, stormed to Hannah's apartment, and banged on the door until she answered. She looked radiant, glowing in a way I hadn't seen before. The ring sparkled on her finger like a cruel joke. "You're engaged," I spat. Her smile faltered, then returned in a softer form. "I wanted to tell you." "When?" I cut her off. "After the wedding? Or maybe when I got an invitation in the mail." She sighed, leaning against the doorframe. "I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to hurt you." "Hurt me?" My voice cracked, rising with each word. "You're marrying my ex. The man who broke me. And you were supposed to be the one person I could trust." Her eyes flashed, just for a second, with something cold. But she quickly masked it with a pleading look. "I didn't plan this," she said softly. "It just happened. We connected. I know it looks bad, but we love each other. I can't apologize for that." Love. She dared to call it love. I left that night with tears streaming down my face, my chest hollow and burning all at once. I felt betrayed in a way I couldn't put into words. The engagement spread like wildfire. Social media posts, family whispers, friends torn between loyalties. Some people pitied me, others stayed silent, and a few even congratulated them like their union wasn't built on lies. But the true devastation came when my parents called me over for a serious talk. "We heard the news," my father said gently, his eyes filled with sympathy. "And we need to discuss how this affects the family arrangements." I frowned. "What do you mean?" My mother folded her hands. "Ethan will be family now. And since the inheritance is tied to marriage, technically, if you're not married but your closest ties are, we may need to reconsider how things are distributed." Her words were a knife twisting in my gut. I stared at them in disbelief. "You're saying Hannah and Ethan could get what's supposed to be mine?" "It's complicated," my father said carefully. "We never expected this situation." I couldn't believe it. Not only had I lost my boyfriend and my best friend, but now the very inheritance meant for me was slipping into their hands. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at the ceiling, rage and grief warring inside me. They hadn't just taken my heart. They hadn't just stolen my trust. They were taking my future. The house, the business, the legacy my parents had worked so hard to build. And the worst part was, they planned it. I could feel it in my bones. This wasn't some accident, some coincidence. Hannah had known about the inheritance condition. She had known what she was doing when she latched onto Ethan. They weren't just in love. They were in it for the money. And if they thought I was going to stand by and watch them destroy me, they had no idea who they were dealing with. Because in that moment, I made a vow to myself. If they wanted to play dirty, I would make sure they drowned in the mess they created. I didn't go to their wedding. People told me I should to show you're the bigger person, they said, to prove you've moved on. But the thought of standing there, watching Hannah walk down the aisle to Ethan while wearing the same smile she once swore was meant for me, it was unbearable. So instead, I stayed home. I drew the blinds, turned off my phone, and tried to block out the world. But I couldn't block out the images that my mind conjured anyway. Hannah in a white gown, Ethan waiting at the altar, the two of them exchanging vows that once belonged to the life I was supposed to have. It should have been enough to break me completely. But then, days later, came the blow that shattered me in ways I hadn't thought possible. My parents invited me to lunch. I walked into their house, the familiar smell of my mother's cooking wrapping around me like a blanket I no longer felt comforted by. "Sit," my father said, his tone too careful, too rehearsed. My stomach nodded. "What's going on?" He exchanged a look with my mother before speaking. "Now that Hannah and Ethan are married, we've had to reconsider how the family estate is handled. Technically, Ethan is now part of the family." I blinked. So, my mother said softly, "the inheritance stipulation, it gets complicated. Since you're unmarried, but Hannah is and her husband is Ethan, well, it could be interpreted that they now have a claim to part of what was meant for you." My fork clattered onto the plate. "You can't be serious. They don't deserve a cent. That money was meant for me. It's tied to my marriage, not theirs." "We know," my father said quickly, holding up his hands. "But these traditions aren't always straightforward. Ethan's connection through marriage makes things messy. And Hannah, well, she argued that family is family, and everything should be shared." The room spun. My ears rang. I could hardly process the words. "Hannah argued this?" I whispered, my throat tight. "Yes," my mother admitted, guilt flickering in her eyes. "She insisted that you wouldn't mind. That you'd want her to be taken care of too." It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Not only had she stolen Ethan, but now she was reaching for the one thing that still gave me a sense of security, my inheritance. I left that lunch trembling with rage. I wanted to storm to Hannah's house, to scream at her until my voice broke. But instead, I went home, locked the door, and collapsed on the couch. How could she? How could the girl I grew up with, the one I trusted more than anyone, stand in front of my parents and argue for my future to be handed to her and Ethan? It was betrayal on a scale I couldn't wrap my head around. The following week, I ran into them for the first time since the wedding. It was at the grocery store, of all places. I was reaching for a carton of milk when I heard her voice behind me. "Hey." I turned slowly. There they were, Hannah glowing, Ethan with his arm casually draped around her shoulders. My stomach flipped, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Congratulations," I said stiffly. "Thanks." Hannah beamed, holding up her hand so the ring caught the light. It was the best day of my life. I wish you could have been there. I stared at her, trying to understand if she was being cruel or genuinely blind to the pain she was causing. Ethan cleared his throat. "We really hope you'll come around. We still want you in our lives." I laughed bitterly. "You want me in your lives? After everything you've taken from me?" Hannah's smile faltered for the first time. "Taken? Oh, come on. We didn't take anything. We just found each other." "Found each other," I repeated, my voice cold. "While I was still bleeding from the wounds he left. While I trusted you with everything. And now you're trying to take my inheritance too." Her eyes hardened. For a split second, the mask dropped, and I saw her for what she really was, not the best friend I grew up with, but a woman who had been playing me all along. "You're being dramatic," she said flatly. "It's family money. Family shares." I stared at her, realization crashing over me. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't conflicted. She believed she was entitled to it. And Ethan? He didn't say a word. He just stood there, silent, complicit, like a shadow at her side. That night, I lay awake replaying the conversation. Their words. Their faces. The cold certainty in Hannah's eyes. They had taken everything: my relationship, my trust, my family's legacy. Or at least, they thought they had. But what they didn't realize was that in trying to strip me of everything, they had given me something far more powerful. A reason to fight. From that moment on, something inside me shifted. The grief was still there, yes, but beneath it burned something hotter. Something sharper. I wasn't going to sit back and let them win. If they wanted my inheritance, they'd have to fight me for it. And I was ready to fight dirty. It was at their wedding reception I later learned that Hannah first whispered her intentions to Ethan. That was when she told him that by marrying her, he wasn't just gaining a wife, he was gaining access to everything my family had built. And he had smiled. Not at her, not at love, but at the thought of the wealth that would soon line their pockets. But love built on lies doesn't last forever. And greed has a way of unraveling even the tightest bonds. I had no idea yet how far they'd go, or how far I'd have to go to take back what was mine. But one thing was certain: this war was only beginning. After the wedding and the inheritance talks, I felt like I was living in some twisted nightmare. Everywhere I turned, Hannah and Ethan's new life was shoved in my face. Social media was the worst. Pictures of them on their honeymoon in Greece, kissing under whitewashed arches, sipping champagne on yachts. The captions were unbearable: living our dream life together. My forever with my best friend turned soulmate. Every word cut like a blade. Best friend. Soulmate. Words that had once belonged to me, now paraded in front of me like trophies of betrayal. But the part that made me sick wasn't the romance. It was the money. The trips, the luxury hotels, the designer clothes, they weren't funding this lifestyle on Ethan's modest salary. That much was clear. They were dipping into my inheritance. And my parents, blinded by Hannah's crocodile smile and Ethan's carefully rehearsed charm, were letting it happen. I slipped into a kind of quiet despair. My days blurred together. Work, home, sleepless nights, repeat. Bills piled up, and without access to the inheritance that had been promised to me, I struggled more than ever. Meanwhile, Hannah and Ethan acted like royalty. They threw dinner parties at their new home, a sprawling place in the suburbs that I later found out was purchased with funds siphoned from the estate. I wasn't invited, of course, but mutual friends would tell me about it. "They've really got it all together," one said casually over coffee. Honestly, it's kind of inspiring. I forced a smile, but inside, I wanted to scream. Inspiring? What was inspiring about stealing everything from someone you called family? But then something shifted inside me. The more they flaunted their wealth, the less I felt like a victim. Instead, I started to see their arrogance as a weapon I could use. They were careless, greedy, and too drunk on their supposed victory to notice they were leaving trails behind. And so, for the first time since the breakup, I began to think clearly. Not about the pain, not about the betrayal, but about revenge. It started small. I attended one of their gatherings, not by invitation, of course, but by crashing it with the excuse that I'd just been in the neighborhood. Hannah's face when she saw me was priceless, tight-lipped, fake sweet, her arm gripping Ethan like he might slip away if she didn't hold on. "Of course, come in," she said, her voice like syrup over a blade. The house was dripping in luxury. Marble countertops, crystal chandeliers, imported furniture. I walked through it all with a calm smile, pretending to admire it, while in reality, I was cataloging every detail. Every extravagant purchase was another piece of evidence that they were burning through funds that weren't legally theirs. At the dinner table, I stayed quiet, listening. Hannah boasted about a new investment Ethan was making, how they were planning another trip to Europe in the fall. I watched their guests nod, impressed, none of them realizing that this entire display of success was built on lies. But I realized something important that night: they couldn't stop bragging. They needed the world to see them as powerful, wealthy, untouchable. And in that need, they were making mistakes. Mistakes I could use. When I left that evening, I didn't feel broken anymore. I felt focused. Determined. I went home, pulled out an old notebook, and began to plan. Step 1. Gather evidence. Step 2. Find the weak points. Step 3. Strike when they least expect it. But revenge, I knew, wasn't about rushing. It was about patience. About letting the trap tighten slowly until the prey was too entangled to escape. And so, I decided to play the part of the quiet, defeated ex-friend. I would let them believe they had destroyed me. Because the more secure they felt, the harder they would fall. The weeks that followed, I watched them carefully. Hannah would call occasionally, feigning concern. "How are you holding up?" She'd ask in that falsely sympathetic tone. "I know this must be hard for you, but I really hope you can be happy for us." I bit my tongue and played along. "Of course," I'd say, forcing my voice to sound even. "You deserve happiness." Inside, my rage burned hotter with every word. Ethan, for his part, avoided me. When we crossed paths in public, he'd give me a stiff nod, his eyes darting away quickly. Coward. He knew what he'd done. He just didn't have the guts to face it. But Hannah? She loved flaunting her victory. And that arrogance would be her undoing. One evening, I ran into a distant cousin at a local cafe. He was an accountant, sharp and meticulous. Over coffee, I casually mentioned Hannah and Ethan's sudden lifestyle change. "Interesting," he said, raising an eyebrow. "From what I know of Ethan's income, they shouldn't be living like that." My heart pounded, but I kept my tone light. "Exactly. It makes you wonder where the money's coming from." He leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "If you ever wanted me to take a look at the estate finances, I could. Just to make sure nothing's off." That was the moment I realized I had an ally. I didn't jump on it right away. I knew better than to rush. Instead, I bided my time, letting Hannah and Ethan sink deeper into their illusion of untouchable wealth. But slowly, quietly, I began gathering bank statements I could access, old emails my parents had shared with me, social media posts flaunting expensive purchases, every little piece of the puzzle. And the more I collected, the clearer the picture became. They weren't just dipping into my inheritance. They were bleeding it dry. Yet, even as I gathered evidence, a small part of me still ached. This was Hannah, the girl I'd grown up with. The girl who used to braid my hair, share secrets under the covers, dream about the future with me. How had she become this person? But then I'd remember the cold glint in her eye, the way she dismissed my pain, the way she argued for what was mine. And the ache hardened into resolve. By the end of that summer, I was no longer the broken girl crying over betrayal. I was the hunter. And Hannah and Ethan? They were already standing in the trap, I just hadn't pulled it shut yet. They always said revenge was a dish best served cold. I decided to serve it as if it came from nowhere at all, a whisper in the right ear, a paper trail that appeared like a ghost, a doubt that multiplied until there was nothing left but panic. If Hannah and Ethan wanted to pretend they'd won, I'd make them question every advantage they thought they'd secured. I would be careful, quiet, surgical. First, I calmed everything down on the surface. I answered Hannah's texts with bland civility. When she called, I picked up and sounded grateful. "Thanks for checking in," I told her like a trained actor. "I'm getting better every day." People who'd watched me crumble believed in the mask. People who'd hurt me trusted I would never fight back. That illusion was useful. Underneath, I moved like a shadow. Step 1, allies. Revenge is rarely solo work. I started with the cousin I'd met at the cafe, the accountant, Thomas. He was sharp, discreet, and, most importantly, trusted by my parents. I phrased my ask innocently. "Could you take a look at some irregularities? I'm worried about their oversight." He agreed to a casual audit, no official drama, just a professional eye. He said nothing about suspicion. He said everything about method. Step 2, documents. I didn't have full access to the estate's ledgers, but I had breadcrumbs. Old emails my mother had forwarded me, copies of bills that passed through our family business, receipts I'd photographed years ago because I liked to keep records. I sat at my kitchen table at night and reconstructed transactions, matching dates to social media posts, cross-referencing vacation photos with account withdrawals. It was tedious, painstaking work, but each line I connected was another stitch in the noose. Step 3. Psychology. People who commit fraud tend to tell stories about themselves. The more elaborate the fantasy, the more likely they are to overshare. Hannah and Ethan were exhibitionists of their success. They loved applause. I used that. I let rumors float to the right places, nudged by anonymous emails and carefully worded questions at family gatherings. Doesn't it seem odd how quickly they upgraded their lifestyle? I heard there were complications with the estate paperwork. No accusations, just seeds. Seeded doubt spreads faster than confrontation. While Thomas quietly traced money flows, I cultivated other small but strategic moves. I re-established ties with old family friends who had always respected my opinion. Over coffees and casual lunches, I spoke candidly about stewardship and legacy, about how quickly fortunes can change hands when legal language is vague. People who had once cheered for Hannah began to blink when her name came up. That blink was gold. Legally, I needed more than gossip. I needed credibility. Thomas found anomalies, transfers classified oddly, invoices that didn't match vendors, a suspicious loan the business had extended to an LLC that, on paper, seemed to benefit Hannah's new household. He wouldn't go to my parents without proof. Neither would I. So we built proof, but we did it without making it obvious. I hired a private investigator, but not for the lurid stuff people think about. I kept his mandate pure: document lifestyle expenditures, locate corporate filings, and verify the identities behind shell companies. He returned with a tidy folder of public records, registrations, bank branches, timestamps that correlated with their most extravagant purchases. Nothing illegal jumped out like a headline, but the pattern was strong: loans to entities controlled by someone close to the estate, withdrawals funneled through accounts conveniently connected to contractors who did work for their new house. It was the kind of thing that, presented calmly to a lawyer, looked like a negligent administrator at best and willful extraction at worst. We didn't go scorched earth. That's amateur. Instead, Thomas and I crafted an approach that would make the truth bloom on its own. We sent an innocuous request to my parents. Could they let us sit down and review recent disbursements? Mom, still trusting and wanting to do right, agreed. We weren't accusing, we were offering help. It made the meeting feel like family concern rather than a legal ambush. When we met, I brought only questions. Can you help me understand this transfer dated after the wedding? I asked, my voice steady. What is this LLC listed here? Did Hannah or Ethan discuss any loans with you? My tone was gentle. My words were precise. Thomas had organized the documents into a clear, comprehensible timeline. He didn't point fingers, he showed facts. People are less defensive when you hand them a ledger and an explanation rather than a salvo of rage. My parents read, furrowed, and then read again. The color drained from my mother's face. Parent shock is powerful currency. When the people who intended to protect you begin to ask their own questions, the ground shifts. My father called a family meeting in a matter-of-fact way that made Hannah and Ethan squirm, not because we'd accused them in public, but because their thin veneer of legitimacy was being tested by the people they'd expected to manipulate most easily. I didn't want to fight in the kitchen. I wanted actions in the courtrooms and banks. So I pushed the family toward professionals. Thomas recommended an estate attorney he respected. We arranged the consultations as an olive branch of family prudence. This is just a review, I emphasized, to ensure everything is correct for everyone. It was the sort of thing no responsible parent would refuse. Meanwhile, I kept applying pressure where it hurt their vanity. I started leaving anonymous notes, not threats. Hints of oversight. A letter to Hannah's neighborhood association about permit irregularities. A call to a contractor saying the funds for the renovation seemed to be coming from unexpected sources. Small, bureaucratic irritations that required them to produce documentation. Each time they produced it, they left fingerprints of their methods: sloppy bookkeeping, backdated receipts, explanations that stretched credulity. Ethan began to crack first. Pride is a fragile thing when your status depends on an unsteady stream of ill-gotten wealth. I saw it in his eyes at family events, the twitch when someone asked a question about finances, the way he avoided my gaze. Hannah, who had always been better at performing confidence, started to develop brittle edges. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes anymore. She argued more in conversations, overcompensating, trying to control the narrative. People see that. They notice when a confident actor begins to read cues. All of this, the thin trail Thomas compiled, the PI's documented lifestyle, the paperwork that didn't quite line up, we collected quietly, legally, without lynch mob theatrics. I was careful to never cross a line into theft, fabrication, or illegal invasion of privacy. I never hacked accounts or bribed people. I simply connected dots that were already there and then arranged for professionals to look at them. That's the difference between vengeance and evidence. At night, after meetings and spreadsheets and covert calls, when I let myself breathe, the old ache returned for the friend I'd lost and for the life that might have been. But that ache was now tempered by something else, the intoxicating precision of purpose. The revenge had stopped being about humiliation and had become about correction. If they'd taken what was meant for me by deceit, then I would use the system, which they'd underestimated, to set things right. I didn't revel in the small victories, a bank freezing a suspicious transfer pending review, a contractor admitting they'd been paid by an intermediary, but I did feel the air shift. They started to look over their shoulders. They started to answer texts later, to cancel celebratory trips with nervous excuses, to ask their friends for legal counsel in whispers. Panic is contagious. Once it settled into their household, everything they'd built to impress the world began to tremble. And the most intoxicating part? They still thought I was broken. They still believed I'd been left with nothing but bitter anger. That blindness let them make bigger mistakes. It made them careless with explanations, with documents, with the pride that had once been their best disguise. The net was set. The pull would come soon, not from a dramatic confrontation, but from cold, undeniable facts presented by sober professionals. I would let the law, the ledger, and the slow ache of public doubt do the heavy lifting. For now, I waited with a calm I didn't show. I polished my mask of defeat. In secret, I tightened the last screws. The next moves would not be mine alone. They would be the consequence of their own hubris. I decided to strike where the wound would hurt the most, the one place Hannah and Ethan wanted more than anything, in front of everyone who mattered. My parents were hosting their annual anniversary gala that year, a deceptively small event that drew close family, a few friends, and the soft glow of people who liked to think of themselves as respectable. It was the perfect stage, familiar faces, old loyalties, and the kind of civility that makes explosions all the more devastating. The week before the gala, I felt the familiar tremor of adrenaline and nausea walking in the front door of my parents' house. My hands were steady. My voice was steady. Inside my bag were printed timelines, bank ledgers annotated with red circles, contractor invoices lined up next to social media screenshots of pricey vacations, and an evidence folder the PI had handed me. A careful bundle of public filings and photographs connecting shell companies to payments for their new home. Thomas, my accountant ally, and the estate lawyer we'd engaged were there too, nodding like a small army of calm before the storm. I didn't plan a scene. I planned clarity. I wanted the truth to look like what it was, a sequence of decisions that, when shown plainly, couldn't be gaslit away with charm or crocodile tears. The night itself shimmered with the usual niceties, glasses clinking, polite laughter, people slipping into conversation about books and vacations. Hannah arrived hand in hand with Ethan, both resplendent and practiced, the kind of couple who've learned to look effortless. For a terrifying second, I felt the old split in my chest, hurt, rage, the childish wish for everything to rewind. Then I saw my father from across the room, eyes flicking toward me. He'd agreed to let me speak. That had been the only concession I'd asked. When I stood up, the room tilted. Everyone felt it, like a chord struck wrong in a familiar song. I didn't preface. I didn't beg. I began by telling the story the way accountants and lawyers taught me to: short, linear, factual. My parents' estate is a trust, I said. It qualifies certain disbursements under specific conditions. Over the last year, we've noticed a pattern of transfers and loans that don't align with how the estate has been managed before. We pursued a review. I looked at my mother. She was pale, her fingers white around her wine glass. That studied me. Thomas and the lawyer took over then, in a way that made everything more official than gossip. They explained how funds had been transferred to an LLC that's tied, through a series of filings, to a contractor who billed for renovations on Hannah and Ethan's new house. They showed the timeline. Deposits, dates that matched social media posts of honeymoon suites and haute couture, invoices created out of sync with the work that was actually done. They didn't call it theft. They didn't scream betrayal. They showed the math. They showed the paper trail. I'd printed evidence for each guest. A few people gasped quietly as they flipped through the documents: my cousin, my father's old business partner, even Hannah's sister who had always been close to me. I watched faces change, the comfortable pretense cracking into something raw and uncertain. That sound, the one people make when the rug gets pulled out, grew louder. Hannah's mask didn't break at first. She smiled, breath held behind her perfect lips, and began to speak in that practiced, syrupy voice she used when someone needed convincing. "This is ridiculous," she said, all warmth and glitter. "Everything we've done has been above board. We paid contractors. We planned for our future." "Your future with money that was never intended to sustain it," Thomas interrupted, his voice calm, surgical. He pointed to a transfer on the spreadsheet and explained how a contractor's payment had been routed through a company listed under a name that connected eventually to Hannah's neighborhood association dues, an innocuous front, but one that, when followed, revealed a pattern of payments, reimbursements, and creative accounting. Ethan's face went from defensive to pale. He started to sputter, to throw up smoke about loans he'd taken from friends, about investments that had turned around. But the lawyer had anticipated this. She had prepared copies of emails where people promised repayment, emails that, months later, paired with debit memos showing funds moving in ways that suggested coordination, not coincidence. There were people I feared would defend them, old friends who'd always loved Hannah's charisma, but even they grew quiet. The weight of paper and dates and legal language does something to people. It takes the poetry out of excuses. Suddenly, Hannah was a woman with an explanation that didn't hold up under the light of quiet, sober facts. Then the PI stood and added what he'd observed: receipts for luxury dinners, invoices for purchases not aligned with the contractor's work, timestamps that correlated with withdrawals. None of it was glamorous. None of it was cinematic. It was ledger lines and bank branches, and the kind of paperwork that, when stacked up, forms a verdict. Hannah's smile finally snapped. She shoved a hand into her clutch as if for an escape route. "You're lying," she hissed, then louder. "This is a setup." It came out brittle, implausible even to her ears. Ethan lunged forward, voice raised, his words finding the air like flailing attempts to catch a rope. My father stood then, and something I had never expected happened. He asked them to leave. It was small, almost mechanical, but in that motion the world shifted. Hannah tried to argue. Guests murmured. A few people approached for quieter conversations with Thomas and the lawyer. A phone call laced with swift urgency went out. One of the bank's compliance officers had been contacted earlier that day and, seeing the pattern, placed temporary holds on several transfers tied to the contractor accounts. The gala, once a stage for smiling faces, became a ledgered reckoning. I felt more than relief. I felt a complicated sadness, an ache at the ruin of something that had been my childhood's safe harbor, mingled with a grim satisfaction that what I'd been told was mine was no longer slipping away in the dark. Hannah didn't plead. She raged, then she crumpled into a cluster of denials and recriminations. Ethan, usually so smooth, looked like a man unmasked, his bravado stripped away. In the days that followed, everything accelerated. The bank confirmed the holds and launched an internal review. Contractors were subpoenaed for records. The estate's attorney recommended a temporary conservatorship for certain accounts while the investigation proceeded. Friends who'd once stayed neutral began calling me, their voices laden with apology or raw curiosity. My parents, stunned and ashamed, hugged me like a small island in the tidal wave of consequence. But consequences are messy. There were flames, of course, accusations hurled at me on social media, private messages suggesting I'd fabricated evidence for attention. Hannah's supporters, outraged and loyal, sought to discredit me with whispers and insinuations. That hurt in a new way, because I'd never wanted humiliation as a sport. I'd wanted only the truth to be recognized. When I closed my eyes at night, the image that woke me was not Hannah's face in the throes of disgrace, but my father's hands shaking as he handed me a cup of tea and said, "We should have listened sooner." There was guilt in his voice that I couldn't erase, but there was also resolute support. He signed papers to freeze certain disbursements pending the full audit. My mother sat with me for hours, poring over ledgers and crying. Then she sat quieter, clearer, as if waking up. The exposure had worked. The net I'd been tightening had pocketed more than vanity. It had captured transaction trails and the possibility of legal remedy. But success tasted complicated. I had won a battle that left friendships in shambles, a family's pride fractured, and two people I once loved reduced to versions of themselves I barely recognized. Standing in the aftermath, I felt less like a victor and more like a woman who had finally taken the first necessary step toward reclaiming what was hers. The real work, the courtrooms, the legal arguments, proving intent rather than mere incompetence, was still ahead. But the world had seen the spine of evidence. That, at least, was no longer something anyone could easily erase. And as Hannah's household began to unravel under the scrutiny, one thing was clear: they no longer moved through the world with ease. The throne they'd built on borrowed trust had begun to crumble. The final collapse, when it came, wouldn't be dramatic fireworks so much as the steady drop of one domino after another. I braced myself for the fall. The weeks after the gala were a blur of headlines within our small circle, emails, legal filings, phone calls at odd hours. But through the chaos, one fact became undeniable: Hannah and Ethan were no longer untouchable. Their empire of lies had been exposed for what it truly was: a house built on stolen bricks, already cracking at its foundation. Banks froze accounts pending review. Contractors distanced themselves, refusing to cover for the suspicious payments that had trickled into their ledgers. My parents, once too trusting, too dazzled by Hannah's smile, tightened their grip on the estate, this time under the careful watch of Thomas and the attorney. And me? For the first time in months, I felt steady. My revenge wasn't fire and screaming. It was ice. Cold, precise, undeniable. The first public fracture came at a family business meeting. My father, always calm, read from the attorney's letter. Based on preliminary findings, disbursements made to outside entities are considered improper. Until further review, all privileges related to those funds are revoked. Ethan bristled. Privileges? That money was ours to use. No, my father cut him off with a steel I'd rarely heard. It was hers. It always was. The silence after those words was deafening. For years, Ethan had held himself like a man ascending into our family's legacy. In that moment, he was stripped bare, an interloper caught with his hand in the vault. Hannah tried to soften it, her voice trembling between charm and desperation. "We didn't mean any harm. We thought." "You thought wrong," my mother said sharply. "You took advantage of trust. And trust, once broken, is not easily rebuilt." Hannah's face twisted, part disbelief, part rage. She wasn't used to losing, and certainly not in front of the very people she'd sought approval from her whole life. The legal process moved slowly, but their downfall moved fast. Without access to the inheritance funds, their glamorous lifestyle collapsed almost overnight. The lavish dinners stopped. The designer clothes disappeared. The mortgage on their new house became a looming shadow instead of a trophy. I heard whispers that Ethan tried borrowing money from friends, claiming cash flow issues. Few believed him. Fewer helped. He'd burned through sympathy with his arrogance. As for Hannah, her mask slipped further every day. She reached out to me once, just once. A text, "Can we talk? Please. You don't understand everything." I stared at it for a long time before replying, "No. I understand enough." And that was it. I never heard from her again. The court hearings weren't sensational. They were meticulous, boring even, filled with accountants and attorneys presenting numbers, contracts, and transactions. But to me, each ledger line was another blade of justice. The judge ruled that the estate's misappropriated funds were to be returned in full. Any claim Hannah and Ethan thought they had was nullified, my inheritance secured once more. When the ruling was read, I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I sat still, calm, as if I'd been expecting nothing less. Revenge wasn't about theatrics anymore. It was about restoration. But justice has a way of bleeding into punishment. Friends who once toasted their engagement now avoided them in public. Ethan's job, once stable, soured under the weight of whispered rumors about his financial ethics. He was quietly pushed out, replaced by someone who didn't carry scandal like a shadow. Hannah? She withered under the scrutiny. The girl who had once been my twin flame, my closest confidant, now walked with her head down, avoiding eye contact. Invitations dried up. Her name, once said with admiration, became a cautionary tale. They had wanted wealth. They had wanted status. Instead, they found themselves ruined, not just financially, but socially, personally, spiritually. And me? I reclaimed what was mine, yes. But more importantly, I reclaimed myself. There was no joy in watching Hannah's fall, only a hollow ache where our friendship used to live. I mourned her, not the woman she became, but the girl I'd once loved like a sister. That girl was gone long before the betrayal surfaced. As for Ethan, I stopped thinking of him entirely. He wasn't a great love lost. He was a mistake, a lesson carved deep into my heart. The final act of revenge wasn't anything dramatic. It was quiet. Months after the court ruling, I visited my parents' house. We sat at the kitchen table, sipping tea, going over estate matters now firmly under my stewardship. My father squeezed my hand. "You've proven yourself," he said simply. "Not just as our daughter, but as someone who will protect this family's legacy. We're proud of you." That was it. That was the closure I needed. Not the sight of Hannah and Ethan ruined, but the knowledge that my family finally saw me clearly, not as the victim of betrayal, but as someone strong enough to rise above it. So here I am, with everything they tried to steal from me restored. My inheritance. My dignity. My future. Hannah and Ethan thought they could bury me under their greed. Instead, they buried themselves. And me? I walked away not just intact, but stronger, sharper, and wiser. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't fire or fury. It's survival. It's thriving when they expect you to crumble. It's reclaiming everything they tried to take, and knowing they have to watch you carry it with grace. If you've stayed with me through this whole journey, thank you. Betrayal leaves scars, but justice leaves lessons. Don't forget to subscribe, drop a like, and share your thoughts in the comments if you want more stories of shocking betrayals and ultimate revenge. Because trust me, there are always more.